Jason, over to you, and thank you for your time and staying up to talk to us.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be able to participate here today. I just want to make sure that you can all hear me.
Yes, we can hear you very clearly and we can see your slides.
Brilliant. I just want to clarify actually one point, and that is that I'm actually with Climate-KIC Australia. So I'm now based here in Australia. And I'd like to start my presentation by asking a question, and that is, how can we transition to from heavy industry based on fossil fuels to industry with net zero emissions? I think this question is important because we know that having the technology solutions is not enough. I know that this conference is really focused on technology solutions and other things, enablers and things like that, but it's very important for us all to understand that, and as I know many of you do, that change is very complex, not only involving engineering, but as well politics, economics, and the efforts and knowledge of many people from a lot of backgrounds. For this presentation, I'll draw on frameworks from the field of sustainability transitions, which is focused on understanding long-term transformation processes of established industries to ones which are more sustainable through production and consumption. And my topic, as you know, is looking at the global drivers for co-investment. Co-investment meaning industry and governments together. I'll be referencing a number of different kind of factors which are driving this, and that is, from my perspective, climate change, the increasing significance of regions and regional development, as well as hedging strategies of companies. During this presentation, I'll give a systems transitions perspective, which I think has relevance for this high temperature minerals processing space. The presentation that I'm going to give today is based on my experience working with system transitions in Europe over the past decade. I was based with RISE Research Institutes of Sweden. We're focused on collaborative innovation, developing large-scale demonstration projects, often funded through the European Union, but as well from Swedish national government, and as well large innovation ecosystem building initiatives for industries and cities. As I said before, I'm now based here in Australia, working with Climate-KIC Australia, and I'll conclude the presentation with something which is very relevant in the Australian context, and that's a new initiative which is just starting up called the Australian Industry Energy Transitions Initiative. And it's currently under establishment, like I said, and there's a public launch scheduled for the 27th of April. So I'll give a little bit of insight on what's going on there. During the first part of my presentation, I'll make reference to the multi-level perspective championed by the sustainability transitions researcher Frank Quels. He's originally from the Netherlands and he's now based at Manchester Business School. So just to explain what you see here on this slide, this is the multi-level perspective, representation of socio-technical system transition in the move from, over time from the left to the right. And I'll start with describing what is represented in the middle with what is called the regime. And here you have socio-technical systems, which is stable on the left. They're stable configurations of markets, infrastructures, technology, consumers, policy, regulation, and so on. And these regimes, as they're called, the established industries, they have path dependence and inertia, and often slow to change due to complex relationships, established regulations on multiple levels, industry standards, cultural norms, and modes of operation. Incumbent firms, that is the established firms, they're often unwilling to change due to sunk costs and risks involved with innovation. So in terms of what we're working with today, you can think about the industry based on fossil fuels being represented in the middle and the left. And what we're trying to do with all of these alternative decarbonisation technologies is reconfigure the regime and move towards the right, where they have incorporated new solutions. And those new solutions come from the niche innovations down below. This is where you have new entrants and there's a lot of experimentation and learning going on. And the hope is that they rise up and become part of new socio-technical regimes. For this to happen successfully, many things need to happen at the same time. It's not just the technology, there's also changes in regulation, there needs to be finance, new standards, etc., etc. And another important factor of this multi-level perspective is the landscape that you see at the top. And this represents the kind of overall context in which the system exists. And it includes macroeconomics, politics, civil society, and as well, it's through the landscape often that shocks occur in the system, which open up for opportunities for change. And these shocks can come from things like wars, natural disasters, economic and environmental crises, as well as political upheaval. From a policy and kind of a technology development perspective, transitions can be supported by supporting the new entrants, the innovations coming up from below, but it can also be supported by working with these established companies, these incumbent firms. And Frank Wells, this transitions researcher, he's studied the kind of reorientation journeys of established industries. And he describes 4 phases that these established companies go through. And often, like I said previously, they're slow to change. They don't really want to change. So in the beginning, they're quite resistant to change. And then over time, perhaps through things that are happening in the broader economy or other things that are shocking the system, they start to hedge their bets. They see that they kind of feel the winds of change, and they start to look for alternatives. And then as things become more promising, they start to diversify their portfolios, and finally they reorientate. Though it's important to note that reorientation is extremely difficult, and the journey is no means deterministic. That means that they might start out by hedging and they go back to resistance and back and forth depending on all sorts of factors. Now, I introduced this as a backdrop to discuss these global drivers that I mentioned previously, and their role in influencing co-investment decisions for large-scale demonstration projects, where these demonstration projects are really crucial stepping stones for niche innovations on their path to becoming part of new socio-technical regimes. The first global driver that I'd like to mention is up on my slide up in the left, and that's climate change. And one of the really big things that happened, as you all are aware, in 2015, the Paris Agreement, where there was a unified global political commitment to take action on climate change. But this is not the only thing that's happening within the climate change space. I think it's also important and relevant to mention the kind of social civil upheaval that's been created by Greta Thunberg from Sweden, and all the climate strikes and people in the streets demonstrating. This is putting pressure on politicians and others to change their ways and take climate change seriously, as well as the increasing rate of natural disasters. And here in Australia, we had horrific bushfires, as everybody is aware. And bushfires and the wildfires is not only happening in Australia, it's also happened in the last year, dreadful fires in California, Europe, and Brazil. And that's not to mention things like droughts, floods, and things like that. So there's a lot of things that are happening which are kind of putting pressure on established industries to change and take climate change seriously. The next global driver that I wanted to talk about was regions and regional development. This is perhaps more of a trend than a driver, and perhaps is different in different parts of the world, but certainly an element, I think, in Europe and Australia. And this is, again, a landscape level element where, part of it is that the rise of populist movements and weakening of mainstream political parties. This is in part, from what I've seen and read, is the kind of the tension between urban elite and their country cousins. And this is causing politicians to look at ways that they can engage and support regional development and create jobs. And part of this is looking at opportunities to work with industry, particularly in regions, and this is really relevant for heavy industry, and how to create promise of new jobs in the future. The third element that I wanted to talk about is down in the bottom right here, and that's the strategies being worked by companies, established companies in this space. And what I'm seeing is that companies are starting to hedge their strategies. Here, they're increasingly looking for alternatives to fossil fuels, and they're also contributing to positive discourse around a low carbon future. And it's not quite that simple, because hedging implies that this is part of their strategy, because their core strategy is still to continue with business as normal, and as well, they're also concurrently influencing politics, and creating more time, buying more time so that they can milk their assets and make the most of the opportunity, because it's quite a big thing for them to transition.
5 minutes, Jason.
Okay, great. When it comes to the strategy, one of the previous speakers from Arena, he mentioned that there are big companies in this space. Rio Tinto is one, BP and others that have come out with strong net zero emission goals to 2050. Okay, this slide here basically summarizes what I've said already, placing in the multi-level perspective these elements. So at the top, there are these landscape level drivers, climate change, the politics of regions, and this is putting downward pressure on the established regimes to really take climate change seriously, and fossil fuels and the transition seriously. Companies are in turn hedging their strategies. And what I see is this is actually, and I've seen it both in Europe and here in Australia, this is opening up for opportunities to create these co-investments in large demonstration plans. And these are crucial for supporting niche innovations to break through and to create new socio-technical regimes or reconfigure around these opportunities. I also put there something to represent the coronavirus. And I think this is something that I haven't actually managed to consider so carefully, but this could well provide some type of economic and societal shock to the system. And it is an element that I think may be significant going forward. I'd like to now just take a few minutes to say something about something which is happening here in Australia, like I mentioned at the start, and mention a few words about the Australian Industry Energy Transition Initiative. And the purpose of this initiative is to accelerate informed action in industry's hard to abate sectors and to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And part of it is also with an eye on ensuring that industry here in Australia is competitive in a decarbonised global economy. The initiative will support developing scenarios and pathways, as well as taking action with on-the-ground projects for net zero supply chains. The supply chains in focus for this initiative, which we call Industry ETI, iron and steel, aluminium, other metals, chemicals, LNG, and also hopefully cement. The initiative is being led by Climate Works together with Climate-KIC Australia, and in partnership with CSIRO, the Rocky Mountain Institute, and has ties to the Energy Transition Commission, building on the Mission Possible work with a focus on applying that in the Australian context. The other thing to mention here is it's actually industry-led. So the steering group of the company, very much like the ETC has representatives, very high representatives from key companies from these sectors. Like I said before as well, this initiative is currently being established, and there's a launch on the 27th of April being planned. We're also, it's also important to note that we're very interested to talk to people that our stakeholders here in Australia that are interested to learn more and get engaged, as well as people overseas in other countries that are interested to exchange knowledge and learnings. So I just have the last slide here up with my contact details. So if anyone's interested in getting in contact and hearing more about the Australian Industry ETI, then that would be wonderful.
Thank you very much, Jason. Can I ask you all to thank him in the normal way? Thank you very much, Jason.